As the world's population grows, the demand for food supply increases dramatically each year. Food suppliers across the world are seeing the increase in demand and are reacting accordingly. In order to keep up with food demands, farmers and suppliers are being forced to increase the size of their annual outputs by either increasing the quantity or producing larger staples through genetic modifications. Increasing the quantity tends to be a more expensive option, so most food suppliers are now genetically modifying their products. While genetic modification has been heard of throughout history, only recently has it become a reality. In the late 1980s, scientists have discovered pieces of DNA could be transferred from one organism to another. Since then, scientists and private companies have been practicing genetic modification in order to increase the attractive qualities in an organism. For example, bigger chickens, larger eggs, bigger apples, longer living test rats, and the list goes on. But one of the most common genetically modified organisms is salmon. Although genetically modified salmon is a highly controversial topic, there are two sides to the argument. Some say transgenic fish offer many positive effects, such as growth enhancement, improved disease resistance, improved cold tolerance or resistance to freezing, increase in immune system, and an altered metabolism to reduce the requirement for fish-based diets in case of carnivorous fish species. The opposing side says it would cause new regulations to be introduced, such as reduced market price, farmers would become more dependent on input suppliers, and pose risks to the environment. When genetically modifying an organism, there are very different methods to do so for plants and animals. In order to input a select gene into salmon, scientists must use a process called microinjection. Microinjection is the process of using a micropipette to insert substances at a microscopic level into a single living cell. Scientists then spread the desired DNA by replicating a select intended group of genes. It is then put into a plasmid, which has the ability to be replicated by bacteria. While bacteria replicates, it makes millions of copies of the wanted gene. The plasma structure can then be changed to form a linear chunk of DNA instead of its original form. Lastly, the final gene is then injected into a fertilized salmon egg. These new genes allow the salmon to grow quickly all year long instead of just warmer months of the year, making salmon to a marketable size within 18 months instead of 3 years. There are many pros and cons when considering the makings of genetically modified salmon. Some benefits are the feed conversion ratio will increase due to the faster growing cycles of the GM salmon. Feed consumption is a growing environmental concern for salmon aquaculture. This issue increases pressure on wild fish stocks and results in the ration of edible fish to feed salmon. GM salmon grows faster and requires less feed, therefore would allow production to increase without increasing the cost. GM salmon have a great bacterial resistance. This would allow in less annual cost for antibacteria and pesticides. In turn, this would cause a lesser impact on the environment. Although there are many benefits to GM salmon, some people think they pose more a threat than a friend. For example, if GM salmon were to escape into the wild, it could destroy and even extinct many species. Another issue would be the salmon's cold tolerance. Their tolerance would allow them to explore new territories that a regular salmon would simply not be able to survive in. This could be an issue because it could change the ecosystem of the new territory the salmon entered and offset the feeding cycle. If the GM salmon were to mate with a non-GM salmon, it could potentially mess up reproduction and cause birthing problems. Another big controversy is if the GM salmon are safe to eat. Some say, because of the foreign genes, many people may have serious allergic reactions to the GM salmon, even if they're not allergic. Even though some people argue that GM salmon will prove to help the economy in other aspects of life, there will always be a counter-argument. Only what is to come in the next several years will determine the outcome of GM salmon and allow for fish farms to sell GM salmon to the public.